Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at unincorporated systems in the Colonies and the Core in 3rd Steel Blade Command. These systems are part of no specific sector and each have independent Senate representation, which is much more common as you get closer to the Core. The only unincorporated core world is Coron, a pretty unimportant manufacturing world. The Core has lots of unincorporated worlds in general, but 3rd Steel Blade Command barely reaches into the Core, and most of what it does have is in the Bormea and DARPA sectors. The Squalrus species are native to planet Ifmix 6 and were one of the first species to join the Republic after its foundation, so they're obviously behind species like the Duros, who were founding members, but still, that's neat. Ifmix 6 is covered in tornadoes, which is also kind of neat. Yabal Opa is a planet-wide university. The Grand Warden of the university is effectively the dictator of the planet, although still subject to the Republic and later Imperial law, and the entire surface area of the planet is part of the campus. That does include a lot of infrastructure, like a regular university campus has dormitories and a food court, and thus will have kitchens, a sewage system, maintenance buildings, and so forth. There are some buildings that aren't dedicated directly to education, but to supporting infrastructure for the classrooms. Likewise with Yabal Opa, which does have farms, factories, and apartment blocks, but it's all supporting infrastructure dedicated to and owned by the planet-wide university. Lofi Star is a planet that has jealously guarded its pristine natural wildernesses for millennia, and the Ace Entertainment Corporation, a front for Sibara the Hutt, butted heads with the planetary government when it expanded its resort, the Ace of Sabers, beyond what regulations allowed. Lofi Star is an entire planet. One resort adding a few dozen extra acres was obviously not going to ruin the whole thing, but Lofi Star officials feared that letting it slide would start a feeding frenzy by every resort on the planet. Raithal has a naval academy that was so popular during the Clone Wars that they had to open up a second branch on Korolog over in Bormea sector. They have the dubious honor of having given Paleon his officer training, the man who would go on to lead the Imperial Remnant Shadow Council for most of its existence. He got overshadowed every time someone more famous like Thrawn or Snoke showed up, but Paleon was the guy who kept the Imperial Remnant together in between major villains. The Karita Naval Academy was an entirely different academy and a less popular one. There were anti-Imperial protests outside the Academy at one point, during which Cassian Andor's father was allegedly killed. No. Here's the thing, according to official standards, the source that claimed Andor's father was killed at this protest is reliable. But it clearly isn't, because that's clearly false. For anyone wondering why I incorporate a lot of questionably true facts into these videos, this is why. They're all questionably true. The supposed standards of quality for what's true and what isn't do not actually work, and if I stuck only to events like the Battle of Yavin that are genuinely, unquestionably accurate, this whole series would be 15 minutes long and wouldn't tell you anything you didn't know already. Wakil Mui is a forest world where the Republic and later the Empire trained soldiers in forest combat tactics, so this is where the stormtroopers deployed to Endor trained on forest fighting. It doesn't seem to have done them much good against the Ewoks, but not only are Ewoks stronger and more dangerous than they look, they are tiny bears after all, but also the Empire standards for training were a massive step down from not only the clone troopers, but even the Republic military of old. Emperor Palpatine was trying to create a new military tradition from whole cloth, and guys like Grand Moff Tarkin had a crippling combination of a lack of real experience and extreme arrogance. The Imperial Officer Corps that came out of the Clone Wars was used to piggybacking on the military traditions of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, who had been used as the blueprint for clone trooper training by the Kaminoans. The naval officers, in their arrogance, attributed their Clone Wars proficiency to their own tactical capabilities and assumed they could match that level of capability leading stormtroopers or Imperial Army troopers. But those guys were mostly trained by the Imperial Officer Corps themselves, and they sort of ad hoc together a training regime based on what they had osmosed from the clone troopers they used to command, what they had inherited from the Republic Judicial Corps, a force that relied exclusively on small arms and squad-level tactics, and their own hazy understanding of the Republic military tradition prior to the Ruusan Reformation. That seems insane, but it's true. Republic naval academies didn't offer extensive training in ground warfare because they are naval academies, and arrogance and contempt for the foes of the Empire was so ubiquitous in the culture of the military that it was practically unheard of for an officer to think they should do the kind of historical research where you actually read primary documents and closely study the militaries of the past. They thought they were familiar with the Republic military tradition because they knew what a Republic trooper looked like. Almost none of them ever made a serious study of either the Mandalorian Neo-Crusader doctrine, nor the doctrine of the Republic troopers during comparable eras like the Great Galactic Wars. and thanks to the backstabbing nature of the Imperial military, the ones who did study and adapt the techniques of successful historical military traditions mostly had their accomplishments stolen by officers whose only skill was brown-nosing. It wasn't until the Galactic Civil War, when they were tested against a formidable adversary, that their deficiencies became obvious, especially after Yavin, when rebel ranks swelled with Imperial defectors, including a lot of those officers who had taken their job seriously, studied the doctrine of the clones and Mandalorians in the Old Republic era, and then gotten passed over for promotion when someone else stole credit. Arcania is a planet obsessed with genetic perfection through mad science. They were allegedly aligned with the Sith Empire since before the Great Hyperspace War, and on the one hand, I buy that Arcania made contact with the Sith Empire ahead of the Republic and kept it under wraps, but on the other hand, the relevant records claim Arcania was enveloped entirely in Sith territory. Fucking how? They're in the northern dependencies. This region was part of the Republic by the time of the First Alsacan conflict. The Vishas Tuwan library complex was an underground super bunker, so I buy that Arcania may have had this library and drawn in Sith Lords to study and experiment there, because that's the kind of thing that can happen in secret despite being firmly within Republic space, which Arcania definitely was. Vishas Tuwan was said to have been destroyed by the end of the Great Hyperspace War, the first war with the Sith, and the Jedi established a temple there to cleanse the taint of the dark side. This temple went on to train Ulic Qel-Droma, the Jedi who fell to the dark side, re-established the Sith Empire, and took Exar Kun as his Sith apprentice, the guy who succeeded Ulic Qel-Droma as Sith Emperor, and nearly destroyed the Republic and the Jedi both. So, didn't do a great job of taint cleansing there. Arcania would go on to be staunchly pro-Republic throughout the Great Galactic Wars and the New Sith Wars, though, so I guess it did ultimately work, even if there were some final spasms of corruption on the planet. Arcania was ripped in half by civil war over mad science minutiae. You might think one side or another opposed the mad science that Arcania had been engaged in for millennia at that point, but no, it was purely a fight over who should be in charge of the mad science. This was in the late Republic era, and Mace Windu helped restore order. Supposedly, he was assisted by the Iron Knights, a species of silica-based life who interacted with the world through droid bodies but were nevertheless living creatures who could use the Force. This seems really far-fetched to me. Being a planet of mad geneticists, the Arcanians offered their services as a cloning hub for the Republic during the Clone Wars, but the Arcanian cloning tradition was not about the production of stable lines of identical workers, custom-built for a specific job. Their biology and culture alike crafted to produce armies of whatever sort was needed, including, ultimately, a literal military army for the Galactic Republic. Rather, the Arcanians created bespoke super beings in the hopes of creating a broadly generalized master race, and since there's no objective criteria by which master race could possibly be determined, they spent most of their time knifing each other in the back over which exact traits should be prioritized. They also paid minimal attention to the culture and upbringing of their creations. Some of them viewed their creations as children and raised them accordingly, others assumed the experiments themselves, being endowed with superior intelligence or courage or whatever other specific trait that Arcanian science team had decided was paramount, would figure out how to build the ideal society themselves. While the Kaminoans produced clones as a product fit for purpose, the Arcanians produced clones in pursuit of ideological perfection, and the vague goals resulted in lots of bespoke creations that mostly blended together to create a soup of extreme genetic diversity and racial division. All this to say, they were never in any condition to produce a clone army and got ignored by the late Republic and the Empire. The Empire did still control the planet just like the Republic did, of course, and rebel forces were fighting the Empire there within weeks of the Battle of Endor, as the whole Empire started to disintegrate after the death of the Emperor. This was one of the first rumbles of what would eventually lead to battles for planets like Brent Hall, way behind the battle lines being drawn between the rebel fleet in the trailing sectors and the Empire in the core. After Jakku, Arcania became an independent system rather than join the New Republic because they didn't want to deal with the Senate passing laws to prohibit replacing eyeball fluid with pure Bacta just to see what happens.